5G Wi-Fi. On the bench, Dr. Korir Singh, Principal Secretary, Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation. Dr. The President launched what is known as a foreign policy document today. MFA 60 years later. What is that about?
So, Kenya has a foreign policy that was developed in 2014, which is 10 years ago. This is the first policy that is sort of in writing as a consolidated document. There before, foreign policy was really more anecdotal, based on principles, based on manifestos of different governments. Now, 10 years have since passed since the adoption of the 2014 foreign policy. A lot has changed. A lot has changed in Kenya, for example. Yeah. Number one, we're talking about the demographic shift. Many young people, highly educated. Number two, there are new voices that demand to be part of conversations around foreign policy. We're talking about civil society, we're talking about you guys in the media, we're talking about private sector. And then number three, there are new national ambitions, particularly encapsulated in the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, Vision 2030, amongst others. And the reality also is that we've had shocks. We've had serious shocks around the COVID pandemic. We've had serious shocks around climate. So internally, first, there are major changes. Externally, there are even bigger changes globally that are affecting us. The number one biggest challenge that we have is the rupturing of the global order, if you like. The fact that the multilateral order that was developed 70 years ago no longer seems to be able to respond to the challenges facing the globe. Number two is the ubiquity of technology. The fact that tech has become such a big deal and it has horizontalized access to information amongst others. And so because of all these changes, it necessitates that as a country we sit back and reflect on a new way of doing foreign policy. And that is why we have developed, in a very consultative fashion, the new foreign policy, which today, by the way, wasn't quite the launch. It was an opportunity for the president as a major stakeholder, as a major driver of our foreign policy, to be able to give his views and his vision of Kenya's foreign policy. Hitherto, or before this, we've had consultations with 12 other major groups, from the judiciary, from parliament, from civil society, even the media. We've had consultations with them, and they have given us their views. And so it's becoming very clear that the new foreign policy will really have quite some innovation in it in terms of how we advance our national interests around how we protect our sovereignty, our economic growth, and deal with the debt crisis and deal with the fiscal challenges that we are dealing with. How much employment we need to be able to create, and how much investment we need to be able to bring into the country, to be able to create those opportunities. And so that's essentially what this foreign policy, the new foreign policy, seeks to do. And we hope that we will be able to conclude that process in the next couple of weeks now, and launch it by the 2nd of December.
Speaking of which, we have, 70 missions abroad?
We do.
About 70 missions?
Absolutely.
Are they necessary? Are they,
So South Africa has 103.
Wow.
South Africa that got independent.
Way after us.
Way after us. We have the same ambitions as South Africa, to be a leader of this continent, to be respected, to be able to provide solutions that respond to our particular predicaments in country, but also within the region. But we have only 70 missions. But these missions are necessary, Jeff. Let me give you an example. Just over the weekend, we received the first direct flight from Malaysia to Nairobi.
That's right.
you know, Air Asia. Okay?
Correct.
We negotiated the bilateral air service agreement with Malaysia just a year ago. Our embassy in Malaysia has been working around the clock to facilitate this. What's the impact of it? More tourists to Kenya, not just from Malaysia, but from that entire ecosystem, because it makes travel to East Asia faster and easier, okay? Additionally, when this flight was flying into Nairobi, it was carrying a number of business people, particularly in the tech sector. Malaysia is very, very keen, or rather Malaysia is a leader in the tech sector, but particularly in the semiconductor sector, which Kenya is trying to develop capacity in, having just become eligible under the US CHIPS Act to access to resources to develop its semiconductor manufacturing ecosystem. And so I'm just giving you a snapshot of what our missions do, okay? Next week, President Ruto and the French Minister of Development will be breaking ground for a new science complex at the University of Nairobi. 35 million euros, okay? Yeah. French investment because of our bilateral cooperation, okay? EcoCloud, G42 and Microsoft, you know, are working on a data center, a $1 billion data center, green data center in Naivasha, because of the state visit that led to the meeting point of all these business deals, okay, that President Ruto undertook to the United States. So I'm here to tell you that our missions, as part of our vision, are being transformed into hubs of economic diplomacy to really drive our economic and commercial agenda that is necessary to create jobs, that is necessary to open up labor market opportunities for Kenyans who are highly skilled. And while there are opportunities in the country, those opportunities are not sufficient to be able to meet the 1 million+ graduates that come out of colleges and technical institutions every year.
Every year. Speaking of missions abroad, Kenyans in Beirut, Lebanon, have been crying out because of what's been happening there. I mean, there's been a war that's been raging, and they don't know how to move forward. What is the mission doing? What is the country doing about Kenyans in Beirut in particular?
Of course, Kenya and the country and government is deeply concerned about this situation. The situation in the Middle East has been escalating and worsening. That conflict has been worsening, putting populations in peril, not just the populations of the citizens of Gaza, but also foreigners who are working in those countries, including Kenyans. And so government set up a task force under the chairmanship of my dear sister, P.S. Rosalyn Njogu. That team that has an interministerial composition has been working round the clock in terms of developing an evacuation plan and an evacuation strategy. We're dealing with a very complex logistical operation to ensure that we evacuate as many Kenyans as is possible out of harm. Already, an initial team, an advanced team has been in Beirut. It's carried out an exercise of verification and documentation and vetting of these individuals, because some of them don't even have documents, Jeff. They've lost documents, or their documents became impounded, amongst others. And because of the exercise that has already taken place, 300 Kenyans have already been evacuated back to the country. That's a gigantic task that government has already accomplished. The second batch of 350 is now being prepared in terms of they're being vetted, and they're being given documents, and they're being moved to safe houses, which again have been facilitated through government effort. And so there's a lot that we are doing at headquarters, but there's also a lot that is happening at our mission in Kuwait, which is the mission that is also in charge of Lebanon, even though we have a honorary council in Beirut, but that is not quite adequate. But we are working round the clock to ensure that no Kenyan in that very fragile and difficult environment suffers suffers harm.
Yeah.
We have already demonstrated, Jeff, that we can be able to evacuate Kenyans out of harm's way. When the Sudan conflict erupted, we pulled all stops to ensure that Kenyans, including workers within international organizations who are non-Kenyans, were evacuated to Nairobi. And some of them have now made Kenya, their place of work. And so there is demonstrated evidence of government targeted, proactive action towards ensuring that these issues are addressed.
Speaking of Sudan, is there an end in sight to this mess? Because let's face it, it is a mess.
To call it a mess, I think, is an understatement. We're talking about a real humanitarian crisis. Yeah. The situation has degenerated to a level where every day hundreds of children are just dying out of hunger and malnutrition. Humanitarian assistance that ought to reach them and is available is unable to reach them because of conflict. But what is the most sad thing about Sudan, Jeff, is the lack of international attention on it. Yeah. Even though we are paying a lot of attention to Gaza, as we should, even though the world is paying a lot of attention to Ukraine, as we should, the world is not paying enough attention to Sudan. And that's part of the reason why, within the context of the African Union, within the context of IGAD, our leaders have been trying to cohere a strategy around how we can deal with the Sudan's predicament. We have not been successful so far, but we will continue to try.
And it's going to get worse before it gets better. You know that. You've dealt with conflicts before. It's going to get a lot worse.
Probably. But again, as Kenya, part of what we are doing, as I mentioned earlier, a huge cohort of civil society leaders who are part of the revolution that threw out al-Bashir in Sudan are actually now based here in Kenya. And we've been working with them under the leadership of, the group is called Tagadun, under the leadership of Hamdok, the former prime minister of Sudan. We've been working with them around a roadmap towards sort of a return to a political solution to this problem, a solution that also involves getting the two combatants, RSF, and SAF, to the negotiating table, because that's the only way we can be able to deal with this. It is established already that based on the arms that each of the groups have, it is not possible to end this war by way of military might. The only way is to ensure a ceasefire, a negotiated ceasefire, and a political settlement to this crisis.
Absolutely. Let's continue to talk about Kenyans in the diaspora. There's a new central bank study that says Kenyans are remitting, 4.2 billion US back into the country. That's a huge part of the GDP.
Absolutely.
Huge part.
It is phenomenal, and it aligns with President Ruto's strategy, which is to say that because the government, Jeff, invests 20% of its budget and has done that over the last 20 years, consistently, on education. This is a colossal investment. It is a loss of investment when, upon the maturation of this human capital, they are unable to access employment. And like I said, even though our economy does grow at about 5%, 6% on an annual basis, and it generates, maybe 500 or so thousand jobs, that does not meet the demands of our graduates. And so we must, as a country, look for opportunities abroad. And it is within that context that entering into bilateral labor agreements, particularly focused on the Middle East, which is the current sort of arena where there's a lot of economic growth, as well as Asian countries, in conjunction with Europe that has sort of an aging demographic. I think in combination, we have been able to map opportunities through, a global labor labor market strategy, and we have identified these opportunities. And so we have become very, very targeted through the State Department of Diaspora, through the State Department of Labor. We've really zoomed into these opportunities and are negotiating labor agreements that not only provide opportunities for semi-skilled labor, but much more higher level skilled labor in tech, in banking, in education, and in a manifold of other sectors. And that is what is contributing to the growth of our remittance. And of course, going into the future, as we look at our economic profile, as we look at our GDP, this is a major, major contributor. And even when we assess part of the factors that accounts for the stabilization of our currency, which has contributed a great deal in lowering inflation and the cost of living, we must be able to credit it to the growth of diaspora remittance. And
also, Dr. Ari, the thing is, the level of jobs, it has to be higher than what we're sending to Saudi Arabia or Absolutely. The Middle East. Do you agree with that?
I couldn't agree more. And that's the negotiation. I was just on phone right now with our ambassador in Qatar, who was just giving me a breakdown of the opportunities that are available and the conversations that they are having with counterparts and companies in Qatar around basically having about three or so categories of labor migrants from Kenya, starting from semi-skilled to the highest of professionals, including medical doctors, and graduate nurses, amongst others.
And that'll happen in Germany?
And that is also happening in places like Germany, and we have negotiations that have been concluded with Austria, and several other jurisdictions. As a matter of fact, South Korea just opened its labor permit system to Kenyans, the first African country to become eligible to the labor market in South Korea. Again, a tribute to our bilateral relations that is very carefully curated and very carefully nurtured through our missions, both the Korean mission here and the counterpart mission in Seoul, together with the political leadership. So again, it is why we must continue to invest in diplomacy, because the dividends cut across sectors. You can't just say that the dividends only accrue to one sector.
Dr. We want to take a break, come back, talk some more. We're exporting all these jobs overseas. What does that say about our labor market here in Kenya? I mean, can we create jobs here, or is it, we can't sustain? But don't answer.
Absolutely.
Think about it.
Absolutely.
And also, the Kenyan in Saudi Arabia. Remember, he was sentenced to death? I know you've been keeping tabs on him. What's the latest? And a lot of people want to know more about that. And I hear also Kenyans in Canada. Remember, they landed in Canada months back, and they became homeless. Just like we have Kenyans homeless in, what was that place? I forgot about it, but I'll find out just now. They need to come back home. You need to repatriate them. The Trump deportations are coming up. He says he's going to deport.
You're throwing so much at me, dude. So you want me to go for it?
I'm throwing a lot at you. Yeah. We're having a great conversation here with the Principal Secretary for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Dr. Korir Singh. He's answering our questions and your questions. Keep them coming at Korir Jeff, at Citizen TV Kenya, the hashtag JKLIVE. JKLIVE takes a break. We'll be back in a moment.